Prime Minister, it's always good to talk to you, but this is a very 2020 interview. I'm in my second to last day of hotel quarantine. You're starting 14 days of isolation at the lodge after your trip to Japan. This really must bring home to you the brutality of the lockdown that's been imposed on South Australia now. Has Premier Stephen Marshall done too much to tackle too little there?
Well, the signs in South Australia are very promising. I've spoken to Premier Marshall again today. I've spoken to him each day over the last few days, obviously. And there's a bit of uncertainty regarding what is potentially a further strain there. And this is a very precautionary action that he's taken. Obviously, they want to avoid what occurred in Victoria, which involved in months and months and months of lockdown. And as a result, I mean, their tracing system is working very well. Their isolation system is working very well. Their testing system has been extraordinary, and that has picked up a number of cases. So, look, I mean, we're going to back his judgment on this, and within a week, I'm very confident that we'll have things back to normal. But the other thing I'd say is this, Chris, is that this will be in place no day longer than it has to be, in their view. This is not some exercise in, pursuing a particular response for its own sake. This is as a result of some careful consideration on their part and some new uncertainties that they're dealing with, and it's highly precautionary. It's not because something hasn't worked. It's those other elements of the package of tracing and testing and so on are working with the support of the Commonwealth, Western Australia, Victoria now, New South Wales. That national system coming in support has actually been very quick and very effective.
But it's very clear now that these states are running a virus elimination strategy. The Chief Medical Officer in South Australia, Dr Nicholas Spurrier, yesterday said they were living a wonderful life without the virus at all behind their closed borders, and that's what they wanted to get back to. The Premier of Western Australia yesterday, Mark McGowan, was quite open. He said the New South Wales approach of containing the virus and tracing down and isolating outbreaks is the wrong one. He just wants to keep the virus out. Isn't this at odds with the national approach of suppression?
Well, the national approach, the National Cabinet decision is suppression, and the states will engage in their own descriptions of that. I mean, we're a federation, Chris, and I think the focus on the points of difference between the states, honestly, at the end of the day, they are responsible for public health in their states. That's what the Constitution says. We haven't changed the Constitution. You seek to achieve as much alignment between the approaches as you possibly can. But at the end of the day, what's most important is we ensure that we get the right results for the country, both economically and most significantly on the health front. And on both of those fronts, Australia is doing better than anywhere else in the world. So I think it's fine to set high standards of collaboration and coordination. But when it comes to the international comparisons, Australia virtually stands alone, particularly when it comes to the coordination between provincial governments. I mean, I've spoken to so many over the course of this pandemic and other places that work under these federated systems. And despite the differences of view, which are inevitable, I mean, to think otherwise, I think, would be naive, to think that every single state and territory is going to run out exactly the same points of view 100% of the time. You've been around in politics long enough to know, Chris, that is not a realistic expectation.
But you must be desperately worried about the consequences, the business forced to close, the jobs disappearing, the community dislocation, the kids not going to school, the families separated. There are enormous consequences from these hard borders and hard lockdowns.
Well, of course, when borders go up and restrictions are put in place, they do come at a cost. There's no doubt about that. And that's why, as a Commonwealth government, we've sought all the way through this to keep Australia as open as we safely can. And there has to be a recognition that these things do impose a cost, and that has to be weighed up against the alternatives. And what we have here is not a 4-month lockdown. What we have here is not a lockdown that has been put in place because of the failure of any tracing system or the other measures that are available and have been effectively implemented. This has been done by the Premier to give the best opportunity to return to that normal state as soon as possible. Let's remember it was South Australia that in the early phases in particular kept their schools open and kept as much open as possible. So I think there's an understanding in South Australia that these measures have been put in place extraordinarily and would be lifted as soon as possible. This is not pursuing these measures for their own sake at all. And that's always important, that they're only done on the basis of clear health advice, and I think the Premier has been very clear about that health advice.